My name is Brad, and the reason I am sending this email to Horror Stories is because I want to share something very, very disturbing that happened to me less than a year ago. It was in 2023, during my shift as a truck driver on a Saturday. This experience has caused me so much trauma that I resigned after that day. I had been with the company for many years, but even so, what happened that night has surpassed me. I have been through many things, as being a truck driver involves being out on the road and very exposed. I have been attempted to be robbed. My truck got stuck on a road in a storm. I have had flat tires halfway through. Well, part of the job, I suppose. But what happened next exceeded my limits. It was terrifying and sinister, and I don't think I'll ever find an explanation. I consider this story paranormal, as do my friends and family who already know about it. I remember that trip as if it were yesterday. We left the base with my colleague Kevin because it was a long way, and we could advance faster that way. The base was located in Nashville, and this time our destination was Austin. A journey that would take more than 22 hours to arrive, depending on the stops we made and, of course, whether the weather was in our favor or not. The important thing was to deliver the cargo on Monday morning. We finally arrived in Austin. The outbound trip was very enjoyable, as my colleague and I took turns driving. One slept while the other drove, and vice versa. Occasionally we chatted to pass the time and stopped a couple of times to have a coffee. The truth is, we had already shared some trips and knew each other very well. On the way back, everything changed. I had been driving for about 4 hours on the road. The sun had already set. When my colleague asked me how much longer it would be until the next stop we usually made, I checked the GPS and there were a little over 100 kilometers left. He asked me to stop as soon as possible, as he felt sick to his stomach and needed to take a break. I asked him if he was okay, to which he replied that he thought he had eaten something that didn't sit well with him, so I focused on finding a safe place to pull over. We were driving on a very dark road between the mountains, but I knew it would only be for a moment, so I wasn't too worried. The important thing was to make sure he felt okay, as he would have to drive in a couple of hours. Finally, I turned on the hazard lights and pulled the truck over to the side of the road. I asked Kevin to get out, but I warned him not to take too long, as we couldn't stay there for long. After stopping the truck and asking Kevin to get out, I was left alone on the dark road as he moved to the side to attend to his needs. While waiting inside the truck, I felt a shiver run down my spine, as if I were being observed by something more than just the darkness of the night. The wind blew strongly, making the truck's body creak and creating an even more unsettling atmosphere. Minutes passed slowly, and I started to become impatient. What was taking Kevin so long? I started calling out to him to make sure he was okay, but I got no response. I decided to get out of the truck and look for him, but when I opened the door, I was met with a perplexing sign. The area around me was shrouded in a dense, oppressive darkness, and there was no sign of Kevin anywhere. Only the eerie silence surrounded me. My instincts told me that something was terribly wrong. I started calling his name louder, hoping for a response, but the echo of my own voice was the only answer I got. With my heart pounding, I took a flashlight out of my pocket and turned it on. Its beam of light cut through the darkness, gradually revealing the chilling reality that surrounded me. On the ground, right next to the truck, I found some drag marks leading towards the edge of the forest that bordered the road. My mind filled with fear and paranoia as I followed the tracks with the flashlight in hand. What had happened to Kevin? What was that sinister trail he had left behind? Every step I took brought me closer to a truth I would rather not uncover. But my curiosity and concern compelled me to continue. Finally, I saw him slowly approaching the truck with a pale face. I asked if he was okay, and he only responded affirmatively, indicating that we should continue. During the journey, I expressed my concern, thinking that perhaps he was paranoid, but I was reassured by the fact that it was just a scare. He barely responded, staring fixedly at the road, which seemed very strange to me. After a few minutes, I suggested that he lie down and rest, as he would have to take over driving in a couple of hours, but he adamantly refused to move from the passenger seat, insisting that he was fine. My mind couldn't stop speculating about what was happening to him. Since he didn't utter a sound, his mere presence made me uncomfortable. I suggested that at the next rest stop, before changing roles, we stop for a coffee as he hadn't slept, and that worried me. Although I was wide awake, albeit a bit exhausted, I knew I had to hand over control during his shift, as the rules dictated. Almost reaching the service station, my cell phone began to ring. Although I had no intention of answering it while driving, I saw that it was a call from Kevin. This puzzled me, as he was sitting next to me in the passenger seat, hardly moving. At that moment, panic overtook me. For a moment, I thought it might be a prank, but he didn't react. I accelerated the truck abruptly and took the exit to stop at the service station. I quickly got off the truck, hoping that Kevin would do the same, but to my surprise, he didn't. I asked if he wanted anything else from the coffee, and he replied that he was fine. Upon entering the station, my phone rang again, and upon answering, I discovered it was Kevin. I answered quickly, thinking maybe he had changed his mind and wanted to ask me to buy him something. But he was shouting, accusing me of leaving him stranded in the mountains when he asked me to stop to relieve himself. This puzzled me even more to hear this, as I was certain we were together at the service station, having coffee. I looked outside from the station to search for him, but he wasn't there. That's when Kevin abruptly ended the call. I called him again to explain what was happening, but all I could hear were his accusatory screams accusing me of abandoning him. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to explain to him that couldn't be true, as we were together at the service station. Kevin insisted that if it hadn't been for the man who happened to pass by and rescue him, he could have been dead, and he threatened to report this incident to his supervisor. However, despite my pleas for him to listen to me and let me say something else, Kevin cynically laughed and hung up the phone. I ran out of the service station, but there was no one there. I circled around several times before leaving, trying to understand how what Kevin was telling me could be possible. Who had been with me during that whole journey? I was in a state of shock. I had to take a few minutes to calm down and continue driving alone, as I now had to take over Kevin's shift myself. Although at that moment, honestly, that was the least of my worries. I tried to stay calm as I continued driving along the dark road. However, fear and paranoia consumed me with every kilometer I covered. What dark force or sinister entity had taken Kevin's place in the truck? As my mind wandered in search of answers, a sense of discomfort and oppression enveloped me. The silence of the night grew increasingly unsettling, and the feeling of being watched intensified with every curve of the road. As I distanced myself from the darkness of the night, my mind could only focus on reaching the base and explaining the whole situation, as well as meeting with Kevin. Upon arrival, I was surprised to find the base deserted. Everyone had gone out on the road. Without hesitation, I began my journey back home, hoping that at least my wife would believe me. When I arrived and began recounting the terrifying night to her, she was shocked and horrified by what had happened to me. I saw horror on her face, but at the same time, relief at seeing me safe and sound. However, neither of us could find an explanation for what had happened that night. The image of Kevin lingered in my mind. That's why I called him that same afternoon and learned that in addition to the fright of the night, he inexplicably suffered a blow to the head and had passed out. A man rescued him, but he didn't remember much more. Although Kevin wants to believe me, he seems unable to accept my account of events. The disappointment and pain this causes me are overwhelming. Losing a friend in this way, combined with the trauma of that night, has been too much for me. Deciding to quit my job that same afternoon was an impulsive act, but I couldn't bear the thought of facing that darkness, that unresolved mystery again. This experience, this inexplicable event, will continue to haunt me forever. It will remind me that there are forces in the world that are beyond our comprehension, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their opportunity to ensnare us. Although I reflect on it time and time again, I know that I will never find a logical or rational explanation for what happened that night on the road. It's a disturbing reminder of how fragile our understanding of the world we inhabit is, and of the dangers that lurk in the darkest corners of existence. In the present day, I have sold my truck and opened a specialized workshop for commercial vehicles. I am no longer behind the wheel, but I continue to work in the same industry, so to speak. And I hope not, but it is very likely that I will hear a similar story to this one over the years. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Horror Stories and hit the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time. If you are enjoying, don't forget to like and subscribe. We continue. Good night, Horror Stories. My name is Wilson, and I have been a truck driver for over 10 years. This paranormal story has haunted me my entire life. I never thought I would experience something like this. I was leaving Fort Worth on Highway 35W towards Waco. I remember I left around 7 p.m. I wasn't tired. I had slept all day and was ready to drive all night. I had coffee at home and felt completely awake. Everything was going as usual. That night the road was quite empty, almost no traffic, and a few hours into driving it was already after midnight. That's when I saw a white van come out of the brush and pull up behind me. At first I didn't think much of it, assuming that someone had decided to stay there. However, the van was not passing me. Normally, us truckers, when we have a vehicle behind us on the road, we slow down and signal for it to pass you. But this van did not do so. I tried for several minutes to let it go without success. It seemed strange since there was no traffic, and it was not risky to overtake. I thought maybe the driver was afraid of driving at night, or was an elderly person, so I slowed down even more and waved them through again. Instead of passing me, the van slowed even further to stay behind me. At this point, I started to get angry. I didn't know what this person was playing at, so I decided to ignore it and move on. More than an hour passed and the van was still following me. I decided to stop at the next gas station to see if the van was on its way and get something to eat. However, instead of passing me, the van also stopped, parking a few meters behind the gas station with its lights off, as if it were waiting for me. When I got close enough, I knocked on the driver's side window, but they wouldn't roll it down. I tried to look inside, but the windows were so dark I couldn't see anything. I turned around, warning them not to follow me anymore, threatening that if they did, they would get in trouble. At that moment, the truck accelerated sharply and I had to avoid it by falling to the ground. I was very upset, but I was relieved that the truck was gone. I stayed at the gas station for about 40 minutes, ate something, had a coffee, and then got back in the truck to continue my trip. I drove a few kilometers and it was almost 3 in the morning when suddenly the same white van appeared again, right behind me. I didn't know what to do or why this person was following me. It seemed personal. Clearly something was wrong. This was no simple joke, and at one point the truck stopped next to my truck. I slowed down to let him pass, but the driver slowed down too. His window was aligned with mine. I thought they were going to rob me. My confusion increased. Why hadn't I done it before, and why had I waited so long? I knew the driver was watching me from the window. The truck began to get closer and closer to my truck until, in a sudden maneuver, it swerved in front of me, slammed on the brakes, and blocked the road. This forced me to make a sharp turn with the steering wheel, veering off the road and hitting a tree. The truck stopped immediately. Fortunately, I didn't have any serious injuries, just some scratches, but I was in shock. I tried starting the truck and radioing for help, but it didn't work. My cell phone was thrown from the truck. I knew I was in trouble. In the middle of the dark at 3 in the morning and in the middle of nowhere with no one to help me, I panicked. As if that wasn't enough, I suddenly saw lights slowly approaching. My breathing quickened when I realized it was the same white van. He parked behind the truck, turned off the engine and lights. The energy I felt in that moment is indescribable. The atmosphere became heavy, filled with a mix of anxiety and confusion. The air became thick, as if an invisible pressure had taken hold of me. I tried to stay calm while making sure to close the truck doors. I looked for something to defend myself with, but only found a baseball bat in the truck. But after about 10 minutes and nobody got out of the white van, I searched for a flashlight, gathered courage, and walked slowly towards it. I couldn't do anything but confront the situation and tell whoever was inside to leave me alone. However, there was absolutely nothing to see. It was all wilderness. I walked slowly to the driver's window, knocked on it, and asked them to please roll it down, but there was no response. I tried again by pressing my head against the window, but I still couldn't see anything. I decided to try to open the door, but at that moment, my blood ran cold. There was no one inside. The driver was not there. I checked with my flashlight at the back, and there was only junk. Everything turned into a nightmare. I can't explain the terror I felt. I ran back to my trailer, but upon opening the door, I saw a man standing a few meters away, staring at me intently. I asked him what was going on, but he didn't answer, just gestured for me to follow him. At that moment, I hesitated, but my instinct told me to follow him. The man walked a few meters in front of me, each step faster. I soon began to lose sight of him until I saw him stop and look towards some bushes. I started to run to catch up with him, but at that moment the man disappeared. He had vanished. When I got to the place where he had stopped, I started yelling at him repeatedly, but he didn't respond. I shined my flashlight, but I couldn't see him anywhere. I approached the place where he had stopped to look, and what I found was horrible. There was a body in an advanced state of decomposition, so deteriorated that he could not distinguish if it was a man or a woman. I ran as fast as I could and got into the trailer. By then, the white van was gone. I tried using the truck radio, but it still didn't work. I lost my cell phone in the crash and had no way to contact the police to report the abandoned body. On the first attempt, I was able to start the truck and accelerated quickly to a gas station that I found about 15 kilometers away to ask for a phone. The journey seemed endless. I could not believe or understand the appearance and disappearance of that man who had tormented me all night, nor the discovery of a lifeless body in the middle of the desert. The indescribable smell of that place stayed with me. I arrived at a gas station and called the police from a payphone, trying to explain what had happened, although I was very agitated. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived at the gas station. I directed them to where I had found the body, and risking sounding crazy, I told them the whole story. They asked me how I had come across the body and what I was doing in that location. I told them how the white van had been following me and how, after a series of strange events, I had found the body, while the agents exchanged looks of disbelief. One of them pulled out his cell phone and showed me a picture of a white van that belonged to a student who had gone missing a couple of weeks ago. Upon seeing it, I immediately knew it was the same van that had been following me. The senior officer asked me to accompany him to the location to verify what I had seen. We drove back along the road in one of the patrol cars, the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness of the night. We arrived at the site where I had found the body, and there it was. The officers examined the scene, and one of them stepped aside to speak on the radio, requesting reinforcements and an ambulance. The other officer asked me to wait in the patrol car. Sitting there, I watched as they moved around the body, taking photos and notes. It took about an hour before they finished. The senior officer returned and asked me some additional questions. After a few hours, they let me go. They thanked me for reporting the discovery and gave me their contact number in case I remembered anything else. I drove back to the gas station, still trembling and trying to process everything that had happened. Weeks passed, and the image of that deteriorated body and the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave my mind. The police never found the culprits, and the case remained unsolved. That experience left a mark on me. I stopped doing night routes and changed my routine, always avoiding that road. Sometimes, when I'm on a lonely road at night, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, hoping not to see the lights of a white van following me again. That boy's restless spirit had chosen me for some reason to find him, perhaps seeking justice or rest. Just thinking about it still sends shivers down my spine. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.